The stars were cold and distant, their light barely reaching the edges of a dying world. Earth had long since become a memory, a ghost planet swallowed by its own mistakes. Centuries of war, greed, and environmental collapse had turned it into an uninhabitable wasteland. Humanity, once proud and dominant, now clung to survival like a drowning man grasping at straws. Scattered colonies floated across the galaxy, fragile remnants of a species that refused to give up. On one such colony, nestled on the edge of known space, life was harsh but not hopeless. The people here called it refuge, though nothing about it felt safe. Refuge was little more than a cluster of dome structures connected by narrow tunnels, built atop a bare moon orbiting a dying star. It was home to fewer than 200 souls, all struggling to survive against dwindling resources, unpredictable weather patterns, and the ever-present threat of alien predators. At the heart of this fragile community stood Jeho, a scientist whose brilliance often masked his quiet desperation. He was tall and lean, with sharp features softened only by the dark circles under his eyes, a testament to countless sleepless nights spent poring over data and equations. To most, he seemed distant, almost robotic in his focus. But those who knew him understood that beneath his stoic exterior lay a man burdened by responsibility. As the leader of Refuge's research team, Jeho bore the weight of humanity's last hopes. By his side was Hygiene, a pilot whose skill behind the controls of a spacecraft was matched only by her fiery determination. Unlike Jeho, she wore her emotions openly. Her frustration when things went wrong, her joy when they didn't. Her hair was cropped short, practical for someone who spent most of her time in helmets and flight suits, but there was a softness to her smile that could light up even the darkest corners of Refuge. She trusted her instincts above all else, a trait that sometimes put her at odds with Jeho's analytical approach. Then there was Dongwu, the engineer, where Jeho was meticulous and Hygiene fearless. Dongwu was pragmatic to a fault. His hands were always stained with grease, and his clothes smelled faintly of oil no matter how many times he washed them. He wasn't one for grand theories or risky ventures. He preferred solutions that worked, even if they weren't perfect, though he often grumbled about Jeho's experiments. Deep down, he respected the man and feared what might happen if his ideas failed. Life on Refuge was a constant balancing act. Food rations were carefully measured, water recycled endlessly, and energy conserved to the point where lights flickered dimly in the corridors. Tensions ran high, especially among the younger members of the colony who had never known anything but scarcity. Arguments erupted over trivial matters, a broken generator, a delayed supply shipment, but these were merely symptoms of deeper unease. Everyone knew the truth. Refuge was running out of time. It was during one of these tense days that everything changed. Hygiene had been sent on yet another exploratory mission, searching for signs of habitable planets or usable resources. Such missions were dangerous and rarely fruitful, but desperation left no room for caution. This time, however, she returned with something extraordinary, an artifact unlike anything they'd ever seen. The object was small enough to fit in the palm of her hand, smooth and metallic with intricate patterns etched into its surface. At first glance, it looked like a piece of alien technology, but none of the markings matched any known language or design. What truly set it apart was the faint pulse of energy emanating from within. It wasn't consistent like a machine. Instead, it throbbed rhythmically, almost as if it were alive. Jeho wasted no time studying the artifact. For days, he barely slept, analyzing every detail with tools cobbled together from whatever scraps the colony could spare. Hygiene hovered nearby, watching intently while trying not to disturb him. Dongwu, meanwhile, grew increasingly uneasy. "You're playing with fire," he warned one evening as they gathered around the makeshift lab. "We don't know what this thing is capable of, and we won't unless we try," Jeho replied without looking up. His voice was calm but firm, leaving no room for argument. Still, Dongwu couldn't shake the feeling that they were treading on dangerous ground. As the days passed, strange things began happening. The artifact seemed to respond to certain frequencies, emitting bursts of light and heat when exposed to specific wavelengths. Once, Jeho swore he saw shadows moving across its surface, though no one else could confirm it. Then came the dreams, or rather, the visions. Each night, Jeho found himself transported to unfamiliar landscapes filled with towering structures and glowing entities. They spoke not in words but in sensations, flooding his mind with images of destruction and rebirth. Hygiene noticed the toll it was taking on him. "You need to rest," she said one morning, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Whatever this thing is doing to you, it's too much." "I can't stop now," Jeho insisted. "This could be our only chance." But Dongwu's fears proved justified when disaster struck. During a routine test, the artifact suddenly flared to life, releasing a surge of energy that knocked everyone off their feet. Alarms blared throughout the colony as systems overloaded, plunging refuge into chaos. When the dust settled, Jeho realized the artifact had done more than disrupt their equipment. It had opened a rift in space-time. Through the shimmering portal, they glimpsed another dimension, vast and otherworldly. Strange beings drifted through the void, their forms shifting like liquid light. One figure stood out among them, a towering entity radiating both awe and dread. It communicated not through speech but through emotions, flooding their minds with overwhelming sensations of curiosity, fear, and resolve. Before anyone could react, a message came through the colony's communication system. A neighboring outpost reported that a massive black hole was expanding rapidly, consuming entire star systems in its path. Refuge was next. Time was running out. With the artifact offering tantalizing hints of salvation and grave risks, the trio faced an impossible decision: activate the artifact fully and risk unleashing forces beyond their control, or abandon hope and prepare for the end. Jeho stared at the pulsing object in his hands, weighing the lives of his people against the unknown. Hygiene watched him silently, her expression unreadable. Dongwu clenched his fists, torn between logic and instinct. In the end, Jeho made the call. "We activate it," he said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "If this is our only shot, we take it." No one argued. There was no time left for debate. As the black hole loomed closer, swallowing light and life alike, the people of Refuge braced themselves for whatever came next. Whether it would bring salvation or destruction remained to be seen. But one thing was certain: humanity had refused to die, and the universe had no choice but to change. But Dongwu's fears proved justified when disaster struck. During a routine test, the artifact suddenly flared to life, releasing a surge of energy that knocked everyone off their feet. Alarms blared throughout the colony as systems overloaded, plunging refuge into chaos. When the dust settled, Jeho realized the artifact had done more than disrupt their equipment. It had opened a rift in space-time. Through the shimmering portal, they glimpsed another dimension, vast and otherworldly. Strange beings drifted through the void, their forms shifting like liquid light. One figure stood out among them, a towering entity radiating both awe and dread. It communicated not through speech but through emotions, flooding their minds with overwhelming sensations of curiosity, fear, and resolve. Before anyone could react, a message came through the colony's communication system. A neighboring outpost reported that a massive black hole was expanding rapidly, consuming entire star systems in its path. Refuge was next. Time was running out. With the artifact offering tantalizing hints of salvation and grave risks, the trio faced an impossible decision: activate the artifact fully and risk unleashing forces beyond their control, or abandon hope and prepare for the end. Jeho stared at the pulsing object in his hands, weighing the lives of his people against the unknown. Hygiene watched him silently, her expression unreadable. Dongwu clenched his fists, torn between logic and instinct. In the end, Jeho made the call. "We activate it," he said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "If this is our only shot, we take it." No one argued. There was no time left for debate. As the black hole loomed closer, swallowing light and life alike, the people of Refuge braced themselves for whatever came next. Whether it would bring salvation or destruction remained to be seen. But one thing was certain: humanity had refused to die, and the universe had no choice but to change. The decision to activate the artifact fully was made in haste, driven by desperation rather than certainty. Jeho, Hygiene, and Dongwu stood at the center of the makeshift lab, their faces illuminated by the pulsating glow of the object. The rift that had opened earlier still shimmered faintly in the air, a crackling tear in reality that seemed to breathe with a life of its own. None of them knew what would happen when they pushed the artifact beyond its limits, but they also knew they had no other choice. Jeho adjusted the controls on the device he'd rigged around the artifact, his hands steady despite the weight of the moment. "This is it," he said quietly, glancing at Hygiene and Dongwu. His voice carried a mixture of determination and resignation, as if he were preparing for both triumph and failure simultaneously. Hygiene nodded, her jaw set firmly. She trusted Jeho implicitly, but even she couldn't ignore the knot of unease twisting in her stomach. Dongwu, however, looked like he wanted to protest one last time. Instead, he simply crossed his arms and stepped back, muttering under his breath, "If this goes wrong, I'm blaming you." With a deep breath, Jeho pressed the final button. For a split second, nothing happened. Then, with an ear-splitting roar, the artifact erupted into blinding light. The room shook violently, throwing all three of them off their feet. The rift expanded rapidly, swallowing the walls, the equipment, and everything else in its path. Before they could react, the trio was pulled into the swirling vortex, tumbling through a kaleidoscope of colors and sensations. When they finally came to, they found themselves standing in a place that defied comprehension. It wasn't a planet or a star system. It was something entirely alien. The ground beneath their feet shimmered like liquid glass, stretching endlessly in every direction. Above them, the sky was a swirling mass of luminous clouds, shifting and pulsing with energy. Strange beings drifted through the air, their forms constantly changing, glowing with hues too vivid to describe. At first, Jeho, Hygiene, and Dongwu could only stare in stunned silence. Their minds struggled to process what they were seeing, overwhelmed by the sheer strangeness of it all. But then one of the beings approached them, a towering figure radiating an aura of power and wisdom. Its presence was both awe-inspiring and intimidating, filling them with a mix of reverence and fear. "This is Kaeldar," Jeho whispered, though he wasn't sure how he knew the name. Somehow, the information had been planted directly into his mind, bypassing language altogether. He realized that communication here didn't rely on words. Instead, thoughts and emotions flowed freely between them, unfiltered and raw. Kaeldar's gaze swept over the three humans, probing their very essence. They felt exposed, as if their deepest fears, desires, and memories were laid bare for inspection. Yet there was no malice in the entity's actions, only curiosity. Through the silent exchange, they began to understand why they had been brought here. Humanity's refusal to accept extinction had disrupted the natural order of the universe. Other civilizations, faced with similar crises, had eventually succumbed, allowing the cosmos to reset itself. These resets were essential, Kaeldar explained, ensuring the balance necessary for new life to emerge. But humanity had proven stubborn, clinging to existence long after logic dictated they should let go. This defiance had forced the universe to adapt, and now it demanded a reckoning. Jeho listened intently, absorbing every detail. As a scientist, he understood the concept of equilibrium, but this went far beyond anything he'd ever studied. The implications were staggering. Humanity's survival wasn't just a matter of willpower. It was a fundamental challenge to the way the universe operated. And yet, Kaeldar didn't seem angry or vengeful. If anything, the entity appeared intrigued, almost admiring humanity's resilience. Hygiene, however, wasn't so easily convinced. "So what does that mean for us?" she asked aloud, her voice trembling slightly. Though she couldn't articulate it, she felt a sense of injustice. Why should humanity be punished for wanting to live? Wasn't survival a universal instinct? Kaeldar responded not with words, but with images and emotions flooding their minds. They saw glimpses of other species who would face extinction, some accepting their fate gracefully, others fighting until the bitter end. Each story was unique, yet they all shared a common thread: the inevitability of change. Life, Kaeldar conveyed, was not meant to remain static. To grow, to evolve, required letting go of the old and embracing the new. Dongwu frowned, struggling to reconcile these revelations with his practical mindset. "You're saying we have to die for the universe to move on? That doesn't make sense. We survived this long because we adapted. Isn't that evolution?" Kaeldar paused, as if considering the question. Then, the entity showed them another vision, a future where humanity continued to resist, forcing the universe to twist and warp around them. Stars collapsed prematurely, galaxies unraveled, and entire ecosystems were destroyed. It was a grim reminder of the consequences of unchecked defiance. But Kaeldar offered an alternative. Rather than resisting, humanity could choose transformation. By merging with the forces of the universe, they could become something greater, not just survivors, but catalysts for change. This path, however, came with a price. It required sacrifice, both individual and collective. Not everyone would survive the process, and those who did would never be the same. Jeho felt a chill run down his spine. He understood the implications immediately. This wasn't just about saving refuge or even humanity as a whole. It was about transcending their limitations and becoming part of something larger. It was terrifying, exhilarating, and utterly unavoidable. Hygiene, sensing Jeho's inner turmoil, placed a hand on his shoulder. "We can do this," she said softly. Her voice was filled with conviction, cutting through the haze of doubt clouding their minds. "If anyone can figure it out, it's you." Dongwu, ever the skeptic, shook his head. "I don't like this. Too many unknowns. What if we screw it up? What if this is all some cosmic trick?" "It's not a trick," Jeho replied firmly. "This is our chance to save ourselves and maybe the universe too." He turned to Kaeldar, meeting the entity's glowing gaze. "Tell us what we need to do." Kaeldar hesitated, then began showing him fragments of knowledge. Complex patterns, equations, and sequences unlike anything they'd encountered before. It was overwhelming, but Jeho focused intently, committing every detail to memory. Hygiene and Dongwu followed suit, each contributing their unique strengths to the task. Together, they pieced together the steps needed to initiate the transformation. As they worked, the black hole outside Refuge continued its relentless advance. Back on the colony, panic spread like wildfire. Without Jeho, Hygiene, and Dongwu to guide them, the people of Refuge scrambled to prepare for the worst. Some barricaded themselves inside the domes, praying for a miracle. Others gathered in the central hub, debating whether to attempt an evacuation. Un-Suk, the young medic, tried to keep morale high, while Yuna, the hardened soldier, argued for immediate action. Meanwhile, in the alien dimension, time seemed to flow differently. Hours passed, or perhaps days or mere minutes, as the trio grappled with the enormity of their mission. When they finally emerged from their trance-like state, they were exhausted but resolute. They knew what had to be done. "We'll need to stabilize the rift," Jeho explained, his voice hoarse but determined. "It's the only way to protect Refuge and give the colony a chance to escape." "And what about us?" Dongwu asked, his tone laced with dread. "We stay," Jeho said simply. "Someone has to hold the line." Hygiene nodded without hesitation. "I'm with you." Dongwu stared at them, anger and fear warring in his eyes. "You two are insane. You know that, right?" "Maybe," Jeho admitted with a faint smile. "But it's the only way." Reluctantly, Dongwu agreed to return to Refuge and guide the evacuation efforts. He didn't like leaving his friend behind, but he understood the necessity of their sacrifice. As he prepared to step back through the rift, he gave them one last look. "Don't mess this up," he muttered, trying to mask his emotions with sarcasm. Once Dongwu was gone, Jeho and Hygiene turned their attention to the task at hand. Working together, they began channeling the artifact's energy into the rift, stabilizing it enough to allow the colony to flee. The process was excruciating, draining them physically and mentally, but neither of them faltered. They had come too far to give up now. As the black hole loomed closer, threatening to consume everything in its path, the people of Refuge boarded their ships and fled toward the stars. Through the chaos, they caught glimpses of the stabilized rift, a shimmering beacon of hope amidst the destruction. Few realized the cost of that hope. The two brave souls who remained behind, holding the line against a void. In the end, Jeho and Hygiene stood side by side, their hands clasped tightly as the energy surged around them. They exchanged a final glance, their eyes reflecting both fear and resolve. Then, with a burst of light, they vanished, their sacrifice sealing the rift and buying humanity a little more time. And somewhere in the vast expanse of space, the universe took a deep breath, adapting to the changes wrought by those who refused to die. The colony of refuge was in chaos. The evacuation had been messy, rushed, and fraught with tension, without Jeho, Hygiene, and Dongwu to provide clear leadership. The people were left scrambling to make sense of what was happening. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said the black hole had already swallowed the leaders. Others claimed they had abandoned the colony to save themselves. Fear and mistrust began to creep into every corner of the dome structures. At the center of it all stood Un-Suk, a young medic whose calm demeanor often went unnoticed in the shadow of more prominent figures. Un-Suk wasn't a natural leader. He was quiet, thoughtful, and preferred the company of patients over crowds. But when the crisis hit, he stepped forward because no one else would. His gentle voice cut through the panic, offering reassurance where there was none. "We can still do this," he told the frightened colonists gathered in the central hub. "We have to stick together." Opposing him was Yuna, a hardened soldier who had spent most of her life fighting for survival. Yuna didn't believe in hope or unity. She believed in action. To her, staying on refuge was suicide. "We're wasting time," she snapped during one heated argument. "If we don't leave now, we'll all die. Forget about waiting for instructions. We need to move." Their clashes became a daily occurrence, each representing opposing sides of the colony's growing divide. Some sided with Un-Suk, clinging to belief that Jeho and the others would return with solution. Others followed Yuna, convinced that self-preservation was the only logical choice. The colony teetered on the edge of collapse, its fragile bonds threatening to snap under weight of fear and uncertainty. Meanwhile, aboard the evacuation ships, tensions flared just as fiercely. Supplies were limited and tempers ran high. Families argued over rations, engineers bickered about fuel consumption, and pilots debated the safest route to take. Every decision felt monumental, every delay potentially fatal. The black hole loomed large in their minds, an unstoppable force that seemed to mock their efforts to escape. Back in the alien dimension, Jeho and Hygiene fought to hold the line. The energy coursing through them was unlike anything they'd ever experienced, a raw, overwhelming force that pushed their bodies to the brink. Their hands trembled as they worked, sweat dripping down their faces despite the icy chill of the void. Each pulse of energy from the artifact sapped another piece of their strength, leaving them weaker with every passing moment. But they didn't stop. They couldn't. The rift needed constant stabilization, and failure wasn't an option. As they labored, fragments of Kael'thar's earlier messages echoed in their minds. Humanity's persistence had disrupted the universe's balance, forcing it to adapt. Now, their sacrifice would allow not just refuge, but the entire cosmos to evolve. It was a heavy burden to bear, but neither Jeho nor Hygiene hesitated. Hygiene glanced at Jeho, noticing the toll the effort was taking on him. His face was pale, his movement slower than before. She wanted to tell him to rest, to let her take over, but she knew they didn't have that luxury. Instead, she tightened her grip on his hand, silently vowing to stay by his side until the very end. "We're doing the right thing," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Jeho nodded weakly, his lips curving into a faint smile. "I know," he replied. "It's worth it." In the real world, Dongwu returned to refuge just as the first evacuation ships prepared to launch. He looked haggard, his clothes torn and his face streaked with dirt. When the colonists saw him, a wave of relief washed over them, but it quickly turned to dread when they realized he was alone. "Where are Jeho and Hygiene?" someone shouted, voicing the question everyone was too afraid to ask. Dongwu hesitated, his eyes scanning the crowd. He wanted to lie, to give them false hope, but he knew they deserved the truth. "They stayed behind," he said finally, his voice heavy with emotion. "They're holding the rift open so we can get out. We don't have much time." The announcement sent shockwaves through the colony. Some broke down in tears, while others muttered prayers under their breath. Un-Suk stepped forward, his expression grim but resolute. "Then we honor their sacrifice," he said firmly. "We evacuate now and we survive." Yuna, for once, didn't argue. Even she understood the gravity of the situation. Together, they rallied the remaining colonists, ensuring everyone boarded the ships. The process was chaotic, but slowly, painfully, the last of Refuge's inhabitants made their way to safety. As the ships lifted off, the black hole loomed closer, its gravitational pull distorting the landscape below. From the windows, the colonists watched as their former home was consumed, reduced to nothing more than dust and debris. On board the lead ship, Dongwu sat alone in the cockpit, staring out at the stars. His mind replayed the events of the past days, the artifact, the rift, Kael'dar's revelations, and finally, Jae-ho and Haijian's decision to stay behind. He felt a pang of guilt, knowing he should have stayed with them. But deep down, he also knew they had chosen him for a reason. They trusted him to lead the colony to safety, to ensure their sacrifice wasn't in vain. As the fleet moved further away from the black hole, strange things began to happen. At first, it was subtle, odd sensations, fleeting visions, and unexplained changes in behavior. One passenger reported seeing glowing patterns on their skin, while another claimed to hear voices whispering in their mind. These incidents were isolated at first, but soon they became widespread. Eun-suk noticed the changes early on. Patients came to him complaining of headaches, vivid dreams, and heightened senses. Some described feeling connected to others in ways they couldn't explain, as if their thoughts were linked. Eun-suk listened carefully, documenting everything he could, though he didn't fully understand what was happening. He suspected it had something to do with the artifact, and Jae-ho and Haijian's sacrifice. Yuna, however, dismissed the phenomena as stress or hysteria. "People are scared," she told Eun-suk during one heated exchange. "That's all this is. Don't start making up stories about magic or aliens." "It's not magic," Eun-suk countered. "Something's happening to us. Something different." Different is the right word. Over time, the changes grew more pronounced. Passengers developed abilities they couldn't explain, heightened reflexes, telepathic communication, even glimpses of future. These transformations weren't random. They seemed to serve a purpose, enhancing the colony's chances of survival in unpredictable ways. Slowly, the colonists began to realize that Jae-ho and Haijian's sacrifice had done more than buy them time. It had changed them. Dongwu watched these developments with a mix. The journey through the void was long and uncertain. The evacuation ships carried the remnants of humanity, their passengers bound together by shared loss and a fragile hope for the future. Refuge was gone, swallowed by the black hole, but Jae-ho and Haijian's sacrifice had given them a chance to start anew. Yet, as days turned into weeks, the changes within the colonists grew more pronounced and more unsettling. At first, the transformations were subtle. Some noticed their senses sharpening. Others found themselves able to sense emotions or intentions in those around them. These abilities seemed strange but harmless, almost like gifts. But as time passed, the changes became harder to ignore. Passengers began exhibiting traits that defied explanation. Glowing veins beneath their skin, bursts of energy from their fingertips, even the ability to heal wounds with a touch. It was as if the artifact's influence had followed them aboard the ships, weaving itself into their very beings. Eun-suk, the young medic, observed these developments with a mixture of fascination and concern. He spent hours documenting the changes, trying to make sense of what was happening. His notes filled page after page, detailing every symptom, every anomaly. Though he couldn't explain it, he began to suspect that the transformations weren't random. They were part of something larger, a process set in motion by Jae-ho and Haijian's actions. Yuna, the hardened soldier, remained skeptical. To her, the changes were a distraction, a sign of weakness rather than strength. "We don't have time for this," she snapped during one heated discussion. "We need to focus on survival, not fairy tales about glowing hands." "It's not a fairy tale," Eun-suk replied, his voice calm but firm. "These changes are real, and they're happening to all of us. We can't ignore them." Despite her resistance, even Yuna couldn't deny the evidence. Her own reflexes had become unnaturally quick, and she sometimes felt an inexplicable connection to the people around her, as if she could anticipate their movements before they made them. She tried to brush it off as coincidence, but deep down, she knew something fundamental had shifted. not just in her, but in everyone. Dongwu, meanwhile, wrestled with guilt and responsibility. As a de facto leader of the fleet, he bore the weight of ensuring their survival. But he also carried the memory of Jae-ho and Hai-Jin's final moments, their decision to stay behind so the colony could escape. He often found himself staring out at the stars, wondering if he had done enough to honor their sacrifice. The changes among the colonists only added to his burden. Were they evolving into something greater, as Kaeldar had hinted, or were they losing themselves in the process? Amid the uncertainty, the fleet approached its destination, a distant star system rumored to harbor a habitable planet. The coordinates had been hastily calculated based on outdated data, but it was the best lead they had. As the ships entered the system, excitement rippled through the passengers. For the first time in weeks, there was a glimmer of hope. The planet they discovered was unlike anything they had imagined. Its surface was lush and vibrant, teeming with life. Towering trees stretched toward the sky, their leaves shimmering with iridescent colors. Rivers flowed with crystal-clear water, and the air smelled sweet like blooming flowers. It was a paradise, a stark contrast to the barren wasteland they had left behind. The colonists named it Nova Terra, a new Earth. Landing on its surface felt surreal, almost dreamlike. After months of confinement aboard the ships, stepping onto solid ground again brought tears to many eyes. For the first time in years, they dared to believe that humanity might truly have a future. But Nova Terra came with its own mysteries. Strange structures dotted the landscape, ancient ruins that hinted at a civilization long gone. The colonists explored cautiously, their newfound abilities helping them navigate the unfamiliar terrain. Suk examined the ruins closely, marveling at the intricate carvings etched into the stone. They seemed to pulse faintly, as if alive, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they were connected to the artifact. And to Kaeldar. One day, while exploring a dense forest, a child named Minsu stumbled upon something extraordinary. Buried beneath the roots of a massive tree was a fragment of metal, glowing softly in the dim light. Minsu reached out instinctively, his small hand brushing against its surface. In an instant, visions flooded his mind. Images of Jae-ho and Hai-Jin standing alongside Kaeldar, smiling as they watched over the colony. He didn't understand what he was seeing, but he felt a profound sense of peace, as if he were being reassured that everything would be okay. When Minsu returned to the settlement, clutching the fragment, the colonists gathered around him, awestruck. Suk examined the object carefully, recognizing traces of the same patterns found on the artifact. "This is a piece of it," he said quietly, "a remnant of what Jae-ho and Hai-Jin gave us." The discovery sparked a wave of reflection among the colonists. They realized that the changes they had undergone weren't just physical. They were spiritual, emotional, and communal. The artifact hadn't merely altered their bodies. It had transformed the way they thought, felt, and interacted with one another. Slowly, the divisions that had once torn them apart began to fade. Suk and Yuna, once at odds, now worked side by side, their differences bridged by a shared purpose. Even Dongwu, who had carried the weight of leadership alone, found solace in the unity that emerged. As they built their new home on Nova Terra, the colonists embraced their transformation. They learned to harness their abilities, using them to cultivate the land, heal the sick, and protect their community. They also began to understand the deeper meaning behind their evolution. Humanity wasn't just surviving. It was becoming something greater, a hybrid species capable of coexisting with the universe rather than fighting against it. The ruins scattered across Nova Terra offered clues to this new existence. Through careful study, the colonists uncovered fragments of knowledge left behind by the planet's original inhabitants. These beings, it seemed, had faced a similar crisis long ago. Like humanity, they had refused to accept extinction, choosing instead to evolve and adapt. Their legacy lived on in the artifacts and structures that now guided the colonists toward a brighter future. Years passed, and Nova Terra flourished. The colonists thrived, their society built on principles of harmony, empathy, and cooperation. They remembered Jae-ho and Hai-Jin not as martyrs, but as pioneers, the ones who had paved the way for their transformation. Their sacrifice had not been in vain. It had sparked a chain reaction that transcended individual lives, reshaping humanity itself. In the quiet moments, When the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky filled with stars, some colonists claimed to see figures in the distance, shadowy forms watching over them. Whether these were memories, hallucinations, or something else entirely, no one could say. But one thing was certain: humanity had refused to die, and the universe had responded by granting them a second chance, not just to survive, but to thrive. Decades had passed since the colonists landed on Nova Terra, and the planet had become a thriving sanctuary for humanity. The lush forests, shimmering rivers, and vibrant skies now bore the marks of their presence. Fields of crops swayed gently in the breeze, solar panels gleamed under the sun, and domed structures blended seamlessly with the natural landscape. Humanity had not only survived but thrived, evolving into something greater than anyone could have imagined. The changes that began aboard the evacuation ships had continued to unfold over the years. The descendants of the original colonists were no longer entirely human, not in the way their ancestors had been. They possessed abilities that defied explanation, heightened senses, telepathic communication, even the power to manipulate elements like fire or water. These gifts were not random. They served a purpose, enhancing their ability to live in harmony with Nova Terra and its environment. But perhaps the most profound change was not physical. It was emotional and spiritual. The colonists had learned to embrace unity, shedding the divisions that once threatened to tear them apart. Suk's vision of a cooperative society had come to life, with everyone working together to build a future rooted in empathy and understanding. Even Yuna, who had once been driven by survival at any cost, now led training sessions to help others harness their abilities responsibly. Her hardened exterior had softened over time, replaced by a deep sense of purpose and belonging. Dongwu, now an elder, spent his days reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. He often visited a small memorial built near the landing site of the evacuation ships. Carved into stone were the names of those who had sacrificed everything for the colony's survival, most notably Jeho and Hygiene. Dongwu would sit there for hours, staring at their names as if trying to piece together fragments of guilt and gratitude that still lingered within him. He knew he couldn't undo the past, but he hoped their sacrifices had been worth it. One day, while exploring the outskirts of the settlement, a young boy named Minsu stumbled upon something unusual. Buried beneath the roots of a massive tree was a glowing fragment, an object eerily similar to the artifact that had started it all. When Minsu touched it, he felt a rush of emotions flood his mind. Courage, sacrifice, hope. Visions of Jeho and Hygiene appeared before him, standing alongside Kaeldar in a realm of light and color. Though Minsu didn't fully understand what he saw, he felt a deep connection to these figures, as though they were guiding him towards something important. Excited, Minsu ran back to the settlement, clutching the fragment tightly. The elders gathered around him, their faces lighting up with recognition when they saw the object. Suk examined it closely, his hands trembling slightly. "This is a piece of the artifact," he said softly. "It must have been left behind by Jeho and Hygiene." The discovery sparked a renewed interest in the origins of their transformation. The elders shared stories of the artifact and the rift, explaining how Jeho and Hygiene's sacrifice had opened the door to this new existence. For many of a younger generation, these tales were little more than legends. They had never known Earth or refuge, and the struggles of the past seemed distant and abstract. But holding the fragment in their hands made the stories feel real, tangible. Inspired by Minsu's find, the colonists began searching for more remnants of the artifact. Over time, they uncovered fragments scattered across Nova Terra, each one pulsing with energy and offering glimpses into the universe beyond. Through these pieces, they pieced together a deeper understanding of their role in the cosmos. They realized that their evolution wasn't just about survival, it was about balance. By embracing change, they had helped the universe adapt, creating space for new life to emerge. As the years went on, the colonists noticed subtle shifts in the world around them. The black hole that had once threatened their existence was shrinking, its destructive power waning. Stars that had been consumed by its pull began to reappear, faint glimmers of light returning to the void. It was as if the universe itself was healing, responding to the harmony humanity had achieved on Nova Terra. Minsu grew into a curious and thoughtful young man, drawn to the mysteries of the artifact and the ruins scattered across the planet. He became a leader among his peers, using his unique abilities to guide others through challenges both physical and emotional. His connection to the artifact was stronger than anyone else's. He could sense its presence even when it was hidden, and its energy resonated deeply within him. Many believed he was destined for something greater, though no one could say exactly what. One evening, as Min-Su stood atop a hill overlooking the settlement, he felt a familiar pull in his chest, the same sensation he'd experienced when he first touched the artifact fragment. Following the feeling, he wandered into the forest until he reached a clearing bathed in moonlight. There, hovering above the ground, was a shimmering portal unlike anything he'd ever seen. It pulsed with the same energy as the artifact, drawing him closer. Stepping through the portal, Min-Su found himself in a place both familiar and foreign. It was a dimension where Jae-ho and Hyjin had sacrificed themselves decades earlier. The luminous entities drifted silently, their forms shifting like liquid light. And there, standing tall and radiant, was Kaeldar. Though Min-Su had never met the entity before, he felt no fear, only awe. Kaeldar communicated without words, flooding his mind with images and emotions. He saw glimpses of humanity's journey, the struggles on refuge, the sacrifices of Jae-ho and Hyjin, the transformation on Nova Terra. He also saw the future, a vision of humanity continuing to evolve, spreading across the stars and helping the universe maintain its balance. When Min-Su returned to the settlement, he carried with him a profound sense of purpose. He shared his experience with the elders, who listened intently, their eyes wide with wonder. "We're part of something bigger," Min-Su said, his voice filled with conviction. "Our journey isn't over. It's just beginning." From that moment on, the colonists embraced their role as stewards of the universe. They continued to explore Nova Terra, uncovering its secrets and learning from its ancient inhabitants. They also began reaching out to other civilizations, sharing their knowledge and experiences in hopes of fostering cooperation and understanding. Slowly, humanity's influence spread, reshaping the cosmos in ways both subtle and profound. Far away, in the depths of space, the black hole finally vanished, leaving behind a trail of newly formed stars. The universe, once resistant to change, had adapted to accommodate humanity's persistence. And somewhere in the vast expanse of the cosmos, Jae-ho and Hyjin watched over their legacy, their spirits drifting peacefully among the stars. Humanity had refused to die, and in doing so, they had changed the universe forever.